We are in the book of 2 Kings. We're going to attempt to take chapter 8 and 9 tonight. So we're going to move. And I think one of the things that really kind of puts things in perspective as we're going through the Old Testament is we are studying the history of a nation. Guys, history is important. I mean, I know I was horrible in U.S. history. It was like painful for me. Hated every minute of it. And then I got saved and I started looking at the history that God declares, and it kind of like, man, history is important. Because when you know where when you look at what God has done through the lives of others, it teaches you things about the days you're living in. Look at a quote here. Sir Winston Churchill said, "Those who fail to learn from history are doomed to repeat it." And we're doing that very thing. We're repeating the same history that the nation of Israel has lived through as a nation. But that doesn't have to be the case for us individually. And I think that's what the Old Testament, kind of, because what you learn as you're going through the Old Testament is God's relationship with man. You learn about man's relationship with God and how that works. That's what history teaches us. That's what the Old Testament teaches us. And so you learn the lessons. And one of the things you find we're coming to 2 Kings chapter 8 is that God has been trying to get the attention of the nation for years now. He's been trying to get them back on the right path. And they've ignored God. They've rejected God's counsel. They rejected his mouthpieces, the prophets that God would send them. A man by the name of Ahab had come into power. And Ahab married a woman by the name of Jezebel. And Jezebel had an influence upon the life of Ahab, so much so that he was now worshiping her gods, Baal. And as he began to worship Baal, God sends a man by the name of Elisha to come, and he tells him, Elisha, because you've rejected God, God's going to bring a drought upon the land for 3.5 years. Now it's interesting, Baal was the god of thunder, the god of rain. And what God's saying is, you want to make that your God? Let me show you how powerful your God is. He can't even produce. And for 3.5 years, man, there was a drought in the land. God sent Elisha back at the end of 3.5 years, and he calls Ahab, and he says, you know what? I want to challenge your prophets, the prophets of Baal, and we're going to call on the Lord, and let's see who's able to answer prayer. Because that's going to tell you who the God is, right? If your God's able to answer prayer, then you got a God that's powerful. You got a God that's able to intervene in situation, who cares about your circumstances. And so they gathered together 450 prophets of Baal, and there was Elijah by himself. And he says, okay, you guys go first. You sacrifice to your God. You do whatever you got to do to summons your God, and then I'll go after you, and we'll see whose God answers. And they began to cry out to their God all morning long, into the noon hours, and they got to the point where Elijah's mocking them. He's going, where's your God? Maybe he's busy. And literally he says, maybe he's taking care of business. Maybe he's on the pot. Something's wrong with her. He's not listening to you guys. It says to the point where they were cutting themselves. They were trying to just summon up their God by sacrificing even their own lives. And when they got done, nothing had happened. And Elijah comes up, and Elijah says, man, give me my altar. He puts the altar up. He takes the ox, he puts it on the altar. He says, give me buckets of water. They start pouring water over, and he cries out to the Lord. And the Lord sends fire down from heaven, consumed the sacrifice, consumed the altar, consumed the water that was poured upon the altar. And God showed the whole nation that he was the one who was worthy to be praised. So as he continues on, Ahab never repents. Ahab never acknowledges, you know what, we need to serve the Lord, because Jezebel back at home was still influencing him to continue in his Baal worship. He runs into a situation where the man next door to him, Naboth, has a garden, and he wants his garden, his house. He wants to put his garden there where Naboth lived. And he was pouting in his room, Naboth won't give me his garden. And Jezebel goes, what are you crying? You're the king. Let me take care of it for you. And they set up Naboth, they have him killed. And not only him killed, but all of his sons, so that there was not an inheritance, and now the king takes over the house. Elisha hears about it, and guys, this whole story ties in, so I think it'd be good for us to look at it real quick. Go back to 1 Kings chapter 21, and you'll see why as we're going through 2 Kings. Elijah gets word of it. Look at verse 17. This is after Ahab had killed Naboth and all of his boys, and it says, and the word of the Lord came to Elijah the Tishbite, saying, arise, go down to meet Ahab, king of Israel, who lives in Samaria. There he is in the vineyard of Naboth, where he has gone down to take possession of it. Thus ye shall speak to him, saying, you have murdered and also taken possession. You shall speak to him, saying, thus says the Lord, in the place where dogs lick the blood of Naboth, dogs will lick your blood, even yours. So Ahab said to Elijah, have you found me, O my enemy? He said, I found you because you've sold yourself to do evil in the sight of the Lord. Behold, I will bring calamity on you. I will take away your posterity, and I will cut off from Ahab every male in Israel, both bond and free. And I will make your house like the house of Jeroboam, the house of Naboth, and like the house of Baasha, the son of Ahijah, because of the provocation with which you provoked me to anger and made Israel sin. And concerning Jezebel, the Lord also spoke, saying, the dogs shall eat Jezebel by the wall of Jezreel. So God says, you know what? Enough is enough. You're gonna pay for the evil that you've done. So that's kind of the setup. Now, he tells them this, and remember, at this time, Elijah's dead. Elijah has taken his role as the prophet of Israel. And, you would kind of at the point where they're going, man, all of the prophecies of Elisha hadn't come to pass. His sons are still alive, his posterity, his boys are still kings, and they're thinking, you know what? Everything that God declared hasn't come true. And I think there's always that tendency for us to think, because what God said hasn't happened, that it's not going to happen. Matter of fact, it was Peter who says, they're going to, when you start to talk about the coming of the Lord, they're going to say, they've been talking about the coming of the Lord since my grandma was here, since my great-grandma was here. He's never going to come back, but one day he's going to come back. It's just a matter of when. You see, everything God promises comes to pass. It might not come to pass when we want it to or when we think it should, but it comes to pass. And so here we are going back to 2 Kings now, just kind of keeping that in the back of your mind as we'll be getting there shortly. But we're looking at Elisha almost emulating the ministry of Elijah, right? I'll get these two guys mixed up. Elisha is emulating Elijah's ministry. And notice what happens in chapter 8, verse 1. And Elijah spoke to the woman whose son he had restored life, saying, arise and go, you and your household, and stay wherever you can, for the Lord has called for a famine, and furthermore, it will come upon the land for 7 years. So the woman arose and did according to the saying of the man of God, and she went with her household and dwelt in the land of the Philistines for 7 years. Now, we saw this Shunammite woman earlier in Elijah's ministry back in, the first few chapters of the book. She was someone who really wanted to minister to Elisha. She would feed him a meal when he was passing by, and then she talks to her husband, you know what, let's build a little house on top of our house so that Elijah can stay there when he's passing by, and they build him a house, and Elijah would stay there on his journeys. And so Elijah's going, what do you want? I mean, what do you need? I mean, what can I give you? She goes, I'm good, I don't need anything. And his servant told him, Gehazi said, you know what, this woman is barren, she can't have any children. And Elijah says, next year, you're going to have a child. And just like Elijah said, she bears a child. And the child grows for a few years. He's, up in age. And then the child, as Elijah was back at Carmel, the child dies. And the woman goes to him, she said, look, you promised me a child, and why did you even give me a child if you were going to take him from him? God's going to take him from me. I mean, you just brought more grief in my life than any kind of blessing you brought in my life. She was furious. And Elijah goes back with her to her house. As she had put the child in the bed that Elijah would stay in. And Elijah goes and he prays for that child, and God doesn't answer, and he prays, and then he lies on top of that child, face to face with that child lying, and it says that all of a sudden the child came back to life. And it's amazing because you see in this story that God cares for the individual. Here's this Shunammite woman. Elijah goes to her. God had been ministering to her, been blessing her because of her heart to bless the Lord. And he goes and he says, look, for 7 years there's going to be a famine. You need to get out of town. So she goes, you know what, I'll go live in the town of the Philistines. Now that would have been a very short journey. The Philistines were like neighbors. And that meant the famine was going to come on Israel, but it wasn't going to come on the Philistines. Isn't that kind of wild? God's got a pretty good target when it comes to rain. He kind of directs that stuff, right? So the Philistines still, they weren't in a famine, but Israel was in a famine. And what's incredible is this woman didn't ask questions. She didn't go, well, what about my house? Or what? She didn't ask anything. She goes, you know what? Elijah said there's going to be a famine. I'm out of here. She waits 7 years. She comes back. Now, here's the rest of the story. Look at this. And it came to pass at the end of 7 years, the woman returned from the land of the Philistines. She went to make an appeal to the king for her house and for her land. And the king talked with Gehazi. Now remember we met Gehazi? That was Elisha's servant. Gehazi was there with the king. Now, if you remember the last time we saw Gehazi, he had leprosy. I don't think he would be in the king's presence if he had leprosy. I think it was prior to the leprosy that this event is taking place. Because Gehazi is there sharing with the king some of the things that Elisha had done. Now watch this, it gets good. The king talked with Gehazi, the servant of the man of God, saying, tell me, please, all the great things Elisha has done. And it happened as he was telling the king how he had restored the dead to life, and that there was a woman whose son he had restored to life, appealing to the king for her house, for her land. And Gehazi said, my lord, O king, this is the woman, and this is her son, whom Elijah restored to life. And when he asked the woman, she told him. So the king appointed certain officers for her, saying, restore all that was hers and all the proceeds of the field from the day that she left the land until now. Isn't that a cool story? I mean, so she's going to the king saying, hey, they've homesteaded my house. Someone took it over. King, can you get it back for me? And it was interesting that just as Gehazi and the king were talking about the miracle of the son being raised from the dead, here's the woman standing in front of the king. That's not a coincidence, guys. Look at that. Oh, what a great coincidence. No, that's called the divine appointment. Gehazi just happened to be talking to the king that day about Elijah and the miracles he's doing. And here comes the woman with her son, and she's going, hey, I need some help here. And she goes, that's the woman. That's the one that we're talking. I mean, there she is. It's like, what a coincidence. No. You see, God isn't about coincidence. God is about appointments. And so God, had set it up so that Gehazi was there that day having that conversation with the king, so that when the woman came up, that he would be able to say, look at this, this is her. And I love it because, when you're walking with the Lord, when you're walking and wanting to, serve him and bless him, and you know what, God always sets those divine appointments up. Kind of like, oh, that was weird how that happened. No, it wasn't. It was God. It was God working when you didn't even know. You didn't even see him. You had no understanding that God was going before you. And that's exactly what had happened to this woman. And when you have that relationship with the Lord, guys, you can expect God to set up divine appointments for you. It's what he does. I love the picture. Now, look at verse 7. Elijah went to Damascus, and Ben-Hadad, king of Syria, was sick, and was told him, saying, the man of God has come here. And the king said to Hazael, take a present in your hand and go meet the man of God and inquire of the Lord by him, saying, shall I recover from this disease? Again, Elijah just happens to go to Damascus. Now, it wasn't a happen. God sent him to Damascus. Here's King Hazael, or King Ben-Hadad, that is, at this point. Sick. And Hazael, his servant, one of his commanders, says, hey, you're not going to believe this. The man of God's here. And he goes, hey, go inquire of him. Ask him, am I going to get better? Now remember, the king had been in power when his servant had been healed, Naaman, from leprosy. So he knew that, this Elijah, this guy has access to God. This guy's able to perform miracles because God's with him. And so I love that picture. They never said Elijah's name. He says, hey, the man of God's here. He goes, oh, you mean Elijah? That's a pretty good reputation to have when someone says, hey, the man of God's here, and they know your name. Right? They know who exactly they're talking about. And he says, look, the man of God's here. He goes, look, go and talk to him for me. Look, check this out. Look at verse 9. So Hazael went to meet him, and he took a present with him of every good thing of Damascus, 40 camel loads. And he came and stood before him, and he said, your son Ben-Hadad, king of Syria, has sent me to you, saying, shall I recover from this disease? Now, I don't know every good thing in Damascus, but 40 camel loads is a lot of good things. Right? I mean, I don't know how many good things you have in Damascus, but they were all there. 40 camel. I mean, can you realize going, man, here comes another camel, here comes another camel, here comes another camel. And he's bringing him an offering. I want you to talk to me and tell me what God says. And so Elijah said to him, go say to him, Ben-Hadad, you shall certainly recover. However, the Lord has shown me that he will really die. And he set his countenance in a stare until he was ashamed, and the man of God wept. And he's there talking to Hazael, and all of a sudden he just kind of started glazing over, just kind of staring at Hazael. Hazael's going, what's up? Why are you staring at me? You ever just kind of just start looking at someone and they start going, what? What did I do? You know what? I think that was Hazael. And then all of a sudden, Elijah begins to weep. And it says, Hazael said, "Why is my Lord weeping?" Verse 12. He answered, "Because I know the evil that you will do to the children of Israel. Their strongholds you will set on fire. Their young men you will kill with the sword, and you will dash their children and rip open their women with child." And Hazael said, "But what, is your servant a dog that he should do this gross thing?" And Elijah answered, "The Lord has shown me you will become king over Syria." And he departed from Elijah. He came to his master and he said to him, "What did Elijah say to you?" And he said, "He told me you're going to surely recover." But it happened the next day that he took a thick cloth, he dipped it in water, and he spread it over his face so that he died, and Hazael reigned in his place. Wow. So you say, hey, he's not going to die from his disease. He's going to die because you kill him. And sure enough, he does exactly as Elijah says. Now, we're jumping from that story to now Jehoram, who reigns in Judah. Remember, you got, it's kind of confusing because you got Israel, which was the northern kingdom, the 10 tribes, and then you had Judah, which was there in Jerusalem, and you had 2 tribes. They were divided. Now, we're jumping from the 10 tribes to the king of Israel, the king, I'm sorry, not Israel. Israel's the northern kingdom, but the king of Jerusalem and in that region, okay? So we're going to move to verse 16. In the 5th year of Joram, the son of Ahab, king of Israel, Jehoshaphat, having been king of Judah, Jehoram, the son of Jehoshaphat, began to reign as king of Judah. He was 32 years old when he became king, and he reigned for 8 years in Jerusalem. He walked in the ways of the king of Israel, just as the house of Ahab had done. Watch this. For the daughter of Ahab was his wife, and he did evil in the sight of the Lord. Now, he had taken for his wife Jezebel and Ahab's daughter. Again, the influence of a spouse in a marriage, right? It's so vital. That's why, if you're not married yet, when you're looking for a husband or a wife, make sure that you're finding one that is walking the same path you're walking. Because if not, they'll end up dragging you a different path. You think, no, I'll change them. No, you can't change them. Only the Lord can change them. And I can't tell you how many marriages have ended in tragedy because the believing spouse and the unbelieving spouse, can't see eye to eye. They're not heading the same course, the same direction, or that unbelieving spouse begins to drag them away from the Lord. It's a miracle, and it happens at times where, the believing spouse will actually have the influence upon the unbeliever. But there's no promises. That's why he says, do not be unequally yoked together with unbelievers, for what fellowship has light with darkness? Right? You're gambling. You're taking a chance with your soul, with your life. And so it's so important, as you're looking, why would the king of Judah take the king of Israel, Ahab's daughter, for his wife? Because she was all into Baal worship, into idolatry. That's how she was raised. That was kind of at the core of her being. And she ends up being the influence in his life as she became, the one who directed their. Well, look what it says in verse 18. He walked in the ways of the kings of Israel, just as the house of Ahab had done. For the daughter of Ahab was his wife, and he did evil in the sight of the Lord. Yet the Lord would not destroy Judah for the sake of his servant David, as he promised him to give a lamp to him and his sons forever. And to his days, Edom revolted against Judah's authority and made a king over themselves. So Joram went to Zair, and all of his chariots with him, and he rose by night and attacked the Edomites who had surrounded him, and the captains of the chariots of the troops fled to their tents. Thus Edom had been in revolt against Judah's authority to this day, and Libnah revolted at that time. And the rest of the acts of Joram and all that he did, are they not written in the book of the Chronicles of the kings of Judah? So Joram rested with his fathers and was buried in his fathers in the city of David, with his fathers in the city of David. Then Ahaziah, his son, reigned in his place. Now we got another generation, right, coming into play. You know, just this small account that we're given of his reign. Now, we look a little bit now at the end of chapter 8 at the life of Ahaziah, his son. It says, in the 20th year of Joram, the son of Ahab, king of Israel, Ahaziah, the son of Jehoram, king of Judah, began to reign. And Ahaziah was 22 years old when he became king, and he reigned 1 year in Jerusalem. Now, never put a 22-year-old to be a king. It's not a good idea. Right? He lasted a year, right? For 1 year he reigned. And notice what it says, he walked in the ways of the house of Ahab. He did evil in the sight of the Lord, like the house of Ahab, for he was the son-in-law of the house of Ahab. And he went with Joram, the son of Ahab, to war against Hazael, king of Syria, at Ramoth Gilead. And the Syrians wounded Joram, and King Joram went back to Jezreel to recover from the wounds which the Syrians had inflicted on him in Ramah. And when he fought against Hazael, king of Syria, and Ahaziah, the son of Joram, king of Judah, went down to see Joram, son of Ahab, in Jezreel, because he was sick. Now, you kind of get, everything's being set up for chapter 9 now. You have the king of Judah, the king of Israel, together there in Jezreel. And Ahaziah was wounded from a battle that was happening with the Syrians. Now, chapter 9 begins. Let's keep moving. Watch what he says. And Elijah the prophet called one of the sons of the prophets, and he said to him, get yourself ready, take the flask of oil in your hand, and go to Ramoth Gilead. And when you arrive at that place, look for Jehu, the son of Jehoshaphat, the son of Nimshi, and go in and make him rise up from among his associates, and take him to the inner room. Then take a flask of oil, pour it on his head, and say, thus says the Lord, I have anointed you king over Israel. Then open the door and flee, and do not delay. Now, Elisha is sending one of the prophets. Now, if Elisha would have showed up on the scene, everyone would know something's up. So Elijah sends one of the other prophets that was in the school of the prophets, and he says, you know what, I got a task for you to do. You're going to take a flask of oil. I mean, and a flask of oil, that was like, it wasn't like dipping your finger and anointing with oil thing. This was, a good substance of oil. And he says, you're going to go and anoint him. And what they would do is they would take the oil and they would pour it over the king's head. And it would come running down his beard. It would be running down his face. Whatever clothes you're wearing are going to be oil stained forever. Right? I mean, this was a substantial amount of oil being poured upon him. And he says, and you're going to go in there. You're going to tell him, God has made you king. The Lord has made you king. And what's happening is God is now setting up the next king to fulfill the prophecies of Elisha or Elijah. The house of Ahab is going to be wiped out. And we're going to see that play out. And what's amazing is you look at this whole thing is that, God's promises always come to pass, and all the things that God declares come to pass. It's all going to happen. Even though they thought that, Elijah's prophecy, he's already gone, it's not going to happen. No, it's still going to happen, and God is setting it up now. So he goes in and he says, I want you to go do this. This is your task. And so, watch this, verse 4. The young man, the servant of the prophet, went to Ramoth-Gilead. He arrived, and there were the captains of the army sitting, and he said, I have a message for you, commander. And Jehu said, for which one of us? And he said, for you, commander. And he rose and went into the house. He poured the oil on his head. And he said to him, thus says the Lord God of Israel, I have anointed you king over the people of the Lord, over Israel. You shall strike down the house of Ahab, your master, that I may avenge the blood of my servant the prophets and the blood of all the servants of the Lord at the hand of Jezebel. For the whole house of Ahab shall perish. I will cut off from Ahab all the males in Israel, both bond and free. So I will make the house of Ahab like the house of Jeroboam the son of Nebat, and like the house of Baasha the son of Ahijah. The dog shall eat Jezebel on the plot of ground at Jezreel, and there shall be none to bury her. And he opened the door and fled, just like he was commanded by Elisha. Now, you kind of like, well, what's up with he just kind of runs in there. He takes this flask of oil. He just kind of pours it on his head and says, let me tell you, you're going to kill all of Ahab. And then he runs out the door. You kind of like, well, what was that all about? I tried to figure that out. I don't know. I think it was just for like a little bit of drama. This is urgency. Let me tell you what's going to happen. He tells them everything, pours the oil, and then he runs out the door, and all of his buddies are like, hey, what was that guy? What's up with that dude? What was that? And then he comes out and he's dripping, right? Oil all over his head. Watch this. And Jehu came out to the servants of his master, and one said, is all well? Why did that madman come to you? And he said to them, you know that man and his babble. And they said, a lie. Tell us now. Come on, you give it up. What did he come for? What did he tell you? And what's that dripping down your ears? What's going on? And it says, thus he spoke to me, saying, thus says the Lord, I have anointed you king over Israel. Then each man hastened to take his garment, put it under him on the top of the steps, and they blew trumpets, saying, Jehu is king. So all of his friends, there, all of his army that were around him, they realized, he just got anointed to be the king over Israel. And they're excited because now the king is their commander, and they're going to, go and they're going to fulfill the promises that God had made to this new king by the name of Jehu. He had already been anointed to be king. Now, watch this. Look at verse 14. So Jehu, the son of Jehoshaphat, the son of Nimshi, conspired against Joram. So Joram had been defending Ramoth-Gilead, he and all of Israel, against Hazael, king of Syria. But King Joram had returned to Jezreel to recover from the wounds which the Syrians had inflicted on him when he had fought at Hazael, king of Syria. And Jehu said, if you are so minded, let no one leave or escape from the city to go and tell it to Jezreel. Now, he's saying, look, we need to keep this contained right now. And so he says, look, if you're on my side, don't let anybody in and don't let anybody out. And so he's got these guys that are now with him in the battle. Now check this out. So Jehu rode in a chariot and he went to Jezreel, for Joram was laid up there, and Ahaziah, king of Judah, had come down to see Joram. Now the two kings are together, the king of Judah and the king of Israel. A watchman stood at the tower in Jezreel, and he saw the company of Jehu as he came, and he said, I see a company of men. And Joram said, get a horseman, send him to meet them, and let him say, is it peace? So the horseman went to meet him and said, thus says the king, is it peace? And Jehu said, what have you to do with peace? Turn around and follow me. So the watchman reported, saying, the messenger went to them, but he's not coming back. And he sent out a second horseman who came to them. And he said, thus says the king, is it peace? And Jehu answered, what have you to do with peace to turn around and follow me? So the watchman reported, saying, he went up to them and is not coming back. And driving is like the driving of Jehu, the son of Nimshi, for he drives furiously. Now they're trying to figure out, you know what? We know that dude. We know by the way he drives. Now, I've been accused of driving like Jehu. Matter of fact, I thought, man, I got to change my license plate. I got to get a Jehu license plate. I mean, that'd be. There was something about Jehu that, they said, man, we know that guy. We've seen that kind of crazy driving before. That's got to be him. And so they identified him just by the way he was riding his chariot. Now, riding a chariot that's dangerous business. But he was riding it furiously. He was a madman. He was just going down the road, the dirt road, dust flying everywhere. And they go, man, whoever the driving that vehicle, that guy, it's got to be Jehu. No one else drives like Jehu. Look at that guy. That guy's nuts. And what's incredible is they are looking to find out if there's peace. What's going on? Is this peace? Is there something wrong? Is there some issue going on? No, notice the next word. Watch this. So Joram, the king, said, make ready, and his chariots was made ready. And Joram, king of Israel, and Hazael, king of Judah, went out, each in his chariot, and they went out to meet Jehu, and they met him on the property of Naboth the Jezreelite. Now, remember we looked at Naboth earlier? They're there on the very land that Ahab had taken from Naboth. And check this out. It happened when Joram saw Jehu, he said, is it peace, Jehu? So he answered, what peace, as long as the harlotries of your mother Jezebel and her witchcraft are so many. Woo! I think he answered his question. Your mama, right? That's she's a witch. And he says, how can there be peace as long as evil is reigning? Guys, and I think that there's the nutshell right there. There can never be peace as long as evil rules. The only time you can have peace is when righteousness rules. So there was, this desire for peace. I think it was 7 times in those few verses that when is there peace, is there peace, is there peace? And he goes, look, there can't be peace. As long as the witchcraft and the wickedness that's invading the land, as long as there's idolatry and immorality taking over, there's never peace. The only time you have peace is when you have peace with God. Other than that, it's always turmoil. There's a couple of proverbs that come to mind, and one of them is Proverbs 29:2. And watch what it says. When the righteous are in authority, the people rejoice. But when a wicked man rules, the people groan. When righteousness is in authority, man, the people are going, man, we got God's blessings now. But when wickedness is in authority, it just causes grief for all of those under that authority. And Jehu understood that, until we purge the wickedness and the harlotries of the nation, we're never going to have peace. Guys, we're in a very interesting day right now. We're in a very interesting time. I think our nation, is in a place where we got to choose, and we got to stand up for either righteousness, or we're just going to allow the evil to continue to prevail. And when we're living in a nation where we're expanding abortion, you got to wonder, man, how can God ever bless that? There was a couple of executive orders that were written the first few days that our new president came in, and one of those executive orders is that we would now start paying for the abortions of not only our nation, but for the nations of the world. That had been stopped for almost 4 years. And we decided, we're going to go right back to what we were doing. Now, I don't know how God can bless that. I think you look at Joram here. He realizes, until we purge this cancer, this evil, this wickedness that's in our nation, there'll never be peace. We find in our own state, right now being debated and going to be voted on the next couple days, next couple weeks, whatever that looks like, is that we're trying to extend abortion so that you can get an abortion up to the 9th month. I mean, the baby could have been born that same day, and you can abort your baby. That's not a big deal. And you wonder, how is that ever going to bring God's favor or blessing upon a nation? He understood, there's no way that there can ever be peace until this is purged. No, notice the next verse. Look at verse 23. Then Joram turned around, fled, and said to Ahaziah, treachery, Ahaziah. So Jehu drew his bow with full strength, shot Jehoram between his arms, and the arrow came out at his heart, and he sank down in his chariot. Yeah. I'm sick, I know. But when the bad guy gets what he deserves, you're kind of like, yeah. I try to watch The Patriot once a week. I'm kidding. Just kind of like, yeah. And here he is, man. He just kind of throws back his arrow as hard as he can pull it back. He just lets it fling. And I believe it had to be the Lord guiding that arrow. Just like David and Goliath, right? When he gets that one rock and he slings that one rock and it sinks right into his head. Because God was defeating the evil. And all he was looking for was for, someone that's willing to stand up and say, you know what, we're gonna oppose that kind of evil. We're not going to embrace that kind of evil. We're not going to go along with it any longer. Someone has to stand up. And when that person does, God always intervenes. He just kind of draws us, this guy's running. Have you ever shot an arrow? This guy's running full speed. And it just happens to fall, right between his shoulder blades and right into the heart. Because God had sent him on a mission to purge the evil that was taking. But notice this. Look at this. Then Jehu said to Bidkar, his captain, pick him up and throw him into the track of the field of Naboth the Jezreelite. For remember when you and I were riding together behind Ahab his father, that the Lord laid this burden upon him. Surely I saw yesterday the blood of Naboth, the blood of his sons, says the Lord, and I'll repay you in this plot, says the Lord. Now therefore take and throw him on the plot of ground according to the word of the Lord. Wow. Just like God declared back in 1 Kings, he's telling him, look, what God says come to pass. So they take his body, they throw him on the very same plot that his dad, his descendant, had taken from Naboth. Now, when Ahaziah, king of Judah, saw this, he fled by the road to Beth Hagon. So Jehu pursued him and said, shoot him in his chariot. And they shot him in the ascent of Gur, which is in Ibleam. And he fled to Megiddo, and he died there. And his servants carried him in the chariot to Jerusalem, and buried him in his tomb of his fathers in the city of David. In the 11th year of Joram, the son of Ahab, Ahaziah had become king over Judah. Now, when Jehu had come to Jezreel, Jezebel heard of it. And she put paint on her eyes and adorned her head and looked through a window. Now, Jezebel kind of gets word that, Jehu now is coming. So she begins to put her makeup on. She's painting her eyes. We call it cosmetics. You guys know what the word cosmos is, right? It's taking something with chaos and putting order to it. That's exactly. She's there putting her mascara on. It was her war paint. Now, the commentators kind of debate over this. They're kind of like, is she, somehow trying to get dolled up to seduce? They say she was a beautiful woman, Jezebel. She's trying to seduce Jehu and, coming out there and going, hey, guy. It's me. Why don't you come on up? Some believe that was, the others believe that she knew she was going to die and she just wanted to look good. I want to put my makeup on before I die. Everyone's going to see me. I want to look good for the party kind of thing, right? I don't know which be the case, but it says she began to paint her eyes and adorn her head. She got her hair done. She put her makeup on. She got all dolled up. She looked through the window. Then as Jehu entered the gate, she said, "Is it peace, Zimri, murderer of your master?" And he looked up at the window and he said, "Who is on my side? Who?" So 2 or 3 eunuchs looked out at him. Now, he walks up and there she is all, got her war paint on. She's got her hair done. And she looks down and he goes, what do you come? You come for me too? Is this peace or is this not peace? And he goes, and he looks up and there was some eunuchs that were up there. And he looked at them and he says, "Hey, who's for me?" Now, it's interesting that these must have been disgruntled employees. Because watch what happens. We got to finish the story. It says, 2 or 3 eunuchs looked out at him. He said, "Throw her down." So they threw her down. And some of her blood splattered on the wall and on the horses, and he trampled her underfoot. Those eunuchs had a vendetta. They obviously weren't happily employed, and they just kind of like, here's our opportunity. They get Jezebel, they kind of toss her out the window, splatters on the ground. Jehu kind of finishes her off with a chariot. And it's interesting because, and I know it's gory. I'm like, man, some pretty descriptive stuff here. But it's everything that God had prophesied. It was everything that God declared. You see, evil always has a price. It always has a payment. And you and I can look back and go, I'm going to get away with it. You'll never get away with it. You don't get away with sin. There's a payment for sin. It always costs you something. Ahab died in battle. His boys, all gonna. We don't even got time, but chapter 10, all 70 of his sons being slaughtered, beheaded, because Ahab chose to follow his own passions rather than the Lord. And it's incredible because you look at this whole picture, it's God teaching us the lessons. God don't just tell us that just so we have some kind of entertainment, man. He's telling us because he wants us to understand there's a consequence for sin. The Bible says this, do not be deceived. God is not mocked. Whatever a man sows, that's what he's going to reap. Don't be deceived. Don't let no one tell you otherwise. Whatever you sow, whatever you're planting in your heart, in your life, the things that are filling, your heart and your mind, those are the things that will produce the fruit in your life. If you're planting evil, then evil is going to be the result. If you're planting good, then you're going to have good fruit come out of your life. But somehow we think that that's true for everybody else but for me. And that's where the deception comes in. That's why he says, do not be deceived. Because somehow we think that it doesn't apply to us. And it does. There's this whole scene, and we have a few verses to go. We did it. I can't believe we did it. Okay, here we go. It says, when he had gone in, he ate and drank, and he said, go now, see to this accursed woman and bury her, for she was a king's daughter. So they went to bury her, but they found no more of her than the skull and the feet and the palms of her hands. Therefore they came back and they told them, said, hey, this is the word of the Lord, which he spoke by his servant Elijah the Tishbite, saying, on the plot of ground at Jezreel, dogs shall eat the flesh of Jezebel, and the corpse of Jezebel shall be as refuse as on the surface of the field in the plot of Jezreel, so that they shall not say, here lies Jezebel. Wow. To the very end, man, God had declared even that she wouldn't even get a good burial, that the dogs are going to eat her, right? And then she was going to be refuse, right? I mean, there's a big pile of dog, and that's Jezebel. And some might say, hey, she hasn't changed much. And what's incredible, you look at this whole picture and you realize the word of the Lord all the way through till its completion came to pass. All of the prophecies that Ahab and Jezebel, that Elijah had given, had all been fulfilled in these 2 chapters. Because the word of the Lord will always come to pass. Guys, you sit back and read Revelation. You start in chapter 6 all the way to chapter 18, and it talks about 7 years of wrath being poured upon the world. And let me just tell you, it's going to come to pass. It's going to come to pass. Now, when? I don't know. I'm looking at going, Lord, I mean, how much worse can it get? Hurry up. It'd be nice to get out of here, right? But that's God's timing. All I know is it's going to happen. Now, it could happen next week. It could happen 5 years from now. It could happen 50 years from now. I mean, what I think doesn't matter. But what I do know is that it's going to happen. And I think that should be how we live our lives. No, what does God declare? Because whatever God declares, that's what's going to happen. And he's given us so much to guide us and direct us so that we don't have to live that life of rebellion against him, right? He's given us clarity in his word. And man, I just encourage you guys, man, you know what? This book will be the compass for your life if you'll spend the time to pour your heart into it. Let that word come in, transform you. Because it'll give you wisdom. It'll give you guidance. It'll give you direction so that you can make good decisions, so that you can follow truth. This world's lying to you right now, big time. I mean, it's crazy because you can't believe anything that's being declared right now. The news is there's a scenario, and if you don't agree with that scenario, then you get canceled. If you oppose anything that they claim to be true, whether it's true or not, then your voice is silenced. So there's only one scenario that you can hear, and it contradicts this. Now let me tell you, I'm going to choose this over anything that anyone declares. But the only way you're going to know what this says is if you take the time to pour it into you. Because this world is giving you a whole different narrative. And you and I have been given the word of truth. And it doesn't matter how many Ahabs come up and declare Baal as their God, and it'll be so much fun. You can indulge in whatever you want to indulge in. You can have as much pleasure as you want to have, and you just follow Baal because Baal will bring pleasure to your life. And it's a lie. And our world's trying to sell us a lie right now. And the only ones that are going to know it's a lie is those who spend time seeking the word of truth. Other than that, you're just going to buy it because that's all you hear, because that's all you know. Can I encourage you? Turn your TV off. Seriously. Turn the news off. Don't allow that narrative to influence you. Because this here will always come to pass.